Okay, we're live. Hey, everybody. As you guys know, we have a special event tonight. Again, Aron Ra is back with us with Atheist Edge. Wave hi, Jim and Aron. They were here last night on the Great Debate Community channel that I had set up for everybody to come in and to have a channel where anybody can kind of run it. If you want to do a hangout on it, you know, just let me know. And I have a lot of managers for that particular channel, but this is on my personal channel. Aron's been with us a few times before, and Jim's been with us on the other channel, so it's been nice to have them both here together. What we're going to do for this particular hangout, I'm kind of going to turn this over to Jim. He's got some questions for like everybody, and I actually want to be more of a panelist than running this because I'm more interested in the topic. And after those things, then we're kind of having a more free-for-all. If you're interested in joining us, you want to ask Aron or Atheist Edge specific questions, let me know. I'll be monitoring my laptop for that. So if you're a theist especially, this is your shot. Come on in, take the brass ring and go for it, because you may not get an opportunity for a while, because as we know, Aron's been really busy with his Texas senatorial runs. So Jim, you want to just dive right into it while I take care of a few other things real quick?
You kind of broke out there at the end, Steve. All right.
I'm just tossing it right over to you, baby. Tossing it right over.
Okay, thank you, man. Hey, yeah, so first off, thanks for having me back. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be back on here. I think what you guys are doing here is really important, especially now in this divisive climate that we're in, to build bridges and find common ground. So that being said, I got a couple housekeeping. First one was, originally I thought Aron and I living within 40 miles of each other, we might get hit by some of the residual effects of that hurricane. That's not going to happen. So I doubt we're going to get disconnected.
When have you ever seen a hurricane in Dallas?
No, but the rains from it. No, you're right.
I saw one finger of Rita, and it never even rained.
Right. I think we're going to be okay. But let's see. It was great talk last night. I have a lot to talk about, especially the general. I'm going to take that offline. I went back and reviewed one of the Raw Men podcasts with DM Murdoch about the findings of the Exodus and that the general spoke about, and I'd love to get into that with him later. Is it?
Yes.
And if I forget, please someone remind me at the end. We forgot to plug all Aron's books last night. We forgot to plug his run for the senatorial run. We forgot to plug his podcast. So let's do that.
Richard.
I'm not detracting. I'm just saying, okay, pointing out something. We talked about the Trinity too with the general, and I conceded victory because I originally said to the general, I originally said that 1 John 5:7-8 was the only place in the Bible that referenced the Trinity. That is incorrect. There are 26 references, only 2 of which actually reference it, but I do concede victory that the Trinity is referenced, even though we agreed that 1 John 5:7-8 was a forgery. So that being said, I've got 5 questions for you all. We're going to go round table. It's going to be fun and lighthearted. We're going to start. I thought it'd be fun if we started in rank order. So since some of us are military, we're going to start with the senatorial candidate first. Then we're going to go to general. Then we're going to go to the master sergeant. That's me. And then the petty officer first class is Steve. And then all the civilians afterwards, if that's cool with you.
Yeah. All right. Yep.
If, let's see. What was the most recent time that you reversed your position on any topic, and when was it, and what was the topic? And if you want some time to think about it, I'll start with me, or Aron, if you want to start. What was the last time you actually went a full 180 on a topic and said, wow, I've been wrong this whole time, and I stand corrected?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, on the whole issue of monkeys and whether people are monkeys. It was one of the most passionate arguments I've ever had, and it was with someone on the spectrum who just like had no interpersonal skills at all, and he was a complete jerk. There was no charisma about his argument at all, and it went on and on. I had been told all my life that that apes are not monkeys, that they're a different category, and that that humans certainly are not monkeys, and that this has just been ingrained since early childhood. The very reasons that so many people argue with me right now, today, that I can't say that humans are monkeys, because psychopaths are old world monkeys that have that are a side group, or they're a sister group, and we didn't evolve from them. Yeah, I know. I've been all around that, and I'm now painfully aware of the holes in that argument and why I was wrong and why the people criticizing me now are wrong. And so I'm now having to impart that same argument back on them.
Good, General.
And it wasn't an easy thing. It wasn't an easy thing for me to admit either, because the guy was such a complete dick about the way that he argued that I had to mull it over for like a month without talking to this guy before I finally had to concede that, you know what, damn it, he's right. And so I made a video, the video called Turns Out We Did Come From Monkeys, and I sent him a link to that. Just to concede defeat honorably.
Wow. That's yeah, that's good. General.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll be of any interest, but more so from a theological context. When I first became a Christian in 2009 and I transitioned into the faith, I had a sensational eschatology. I mean, included with that a form of Zionistic, perspectives on Israel. And now, 5 years since then, to have a more careful understanding on what Revelation is actually speaking about. And so I've completely, done a 180 from that position. Hold Israel in a certain reverential light, but not political Israel. I think the current situation is too muddy to make any defense of it.
These are a lot to chew on. Mine is meditation. I used to think it was complete horseshit, but the more I learn about it, I think there might be something to it. Also, I've been talking to a former co-host who's a libertarian, and he's got me thinking that my original view on bakeries that refuse to bake cakes for gay weddings, I used to be, that's not right. But then at free market society, they will immediately pay a penalty for that. And I think they should be given more autonomy. Also, and that's it. Wedding cakes. Yes, go ahead.
I want to chime in on that too, because my wife actually hit me with a number of those challenges because I thought it was pretty open-ended. I remember that she made some compelling arguments that changed my mind as well.
On which issue?
Well, I mean, if I'm working at a bakery, it's my own bakery, and somebody wants me to do the Nazi swastika, right? Well, how can I deny that? And then when somebody wants to come in and do all of this other stuff that I completely vehemently go against, how can I deny that? And then I don't remember what the example was, but she was able to do a turnabout. And I wish I could remember I wish I could remember what the counter argument was that because she set a trap and then just closed it. I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that. Yeah, you're right.
Aron, these sound really challenging. You should record these and upload them on YouTube. These little debates with your wife.
That would actually be cool. Okay, Steve,
actually,
next.
Aron, if you come out as a libertarian, I will volunteer for your campaign.
Well, yeah, that's not going to happen. I've read the platform, and worse, I've talked to too many of them.
Okay.
First, let me say I'm glad I was not the one trying to argue with Aron about monkeys and apes, because I've always believed, yes, monkeys are a subset of ape. So I'm glad I wasn't the one trying to convince him of that, and somebody else was able to, because they are members of Cercopithecida. Yeah, see, I help.
Well, no, Hominoidea and Cercopithecida are actually sister groups, but the thing that nobody recognizes is that there's a third group in the fossil record from which both Cercopithecida and Hominoidea derive, and that's Proplyopithecida. But you would have to, when people say that monkey is not a scientific term, okay, fine, monkey is not a scientific term, but if you cite Flegel or Delson, the foremost names in paleoprimatology, they identify Aegyptopithecus as an ape-like monkey and Proconsul as a monkey-like ape, and they also identify all of our ancestors as monkeys. They use the word monkey, even though they are scientists. So while everybody's shitting on me for using that word, I'm only citing the experts and having done the same.
There you go. And I agree.
Wow.
That's why wouldn't want to get into that. As far as when I've changed positions, a really boring story, but since Hogtie Champ is in the audience and we know his ego, it was actually to Hogtie Champ who made an argument. It was a really stupid thing about snowballs, and if you melt them, what happens to the water? Does it sublimate? I have a little bit of background in physics, so I for some reason in my head, took it upon myself to think that it was sublimation, and from what I've read, and I was arguing for that for quite many days, but of course Hogtie and a few other people actually worked out the numbers and showed me literally that it could not be sublimation, and of course I had to concede to my chagrin, but they were right. The numbers spoke, volumes to me. I could not argue with the reasoning, so I did change my position. Good Hogtie. Good for you.
For the layman, what is sublimation?
Sublimation is a phase change between a solid state into a gas. Like carbon dioxide, it doesn't go into a liquid state when it's in room temperature. It basically just turns into a vapor.
Huh. Wow.
Godless. For you.
Godless, you're there?
Sorry, I had to unmute. What's up?
You're next. You want to hear the question again?
No. The question was, what was the last time you changed your position on something?
Oh, well, probably the Islamophobia. I used to be an Islamophobe and I changed my mind.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about that because I have some friends with ex-Muslims of North America. Give a presentation that Islamophobia doesn't actually exist because Islamophobia, the etymology would imply that you have an irrational fear of Islam, but he says it's wholly rational to be afraid of Islam for good reasons.
That's using the actual textbook definition. That's true.
As extreme as it becomes, when I actually, I was very passionate about it. I've never been more passionate about something in my life, and I believed it so strongly that I wanted all Muslims deported from the West. And now I don't know what to believe about a lot of stuff, a lot of the Islam stuff. That a lot of the stuff in the anti-Islam movement is propaganda, which was stuff that really drove me to be so against Islam, such as the existence of no-go zones in like Europe and stuff like that. So I was so turned off from the whole issue because of how passionate I was when I stopped believing it, that I haven't investigated a lot to see what I did believe. If it's some of the stuff I think still might be true, but I haven't spent time to investigate that. So a lot of it, I just don't know what to believe at this point, and I'm not looking into it any further.
Okay. Joe.
Oh,
Joe?
I don't think that moral realism is true, so I can't say anything's morally right or wrong.
And what was your position prior to that?
Well, I wanted to try and find some robust moral realism, like some system that would allow me to say this is objectively wrong, but I can't. They all suck.
Hey, Steve, present Aron.
Real quick, are you inviting these other people? Because I don't recognize the name, Richard.
I invited Andrew. I don't know, Mr.
Since Andrew and Mr. came in late, I'm just going to go straight to Zachary, and then we'll go to the next question.
There's 5 questions.
The last time I changed my position was, it was funny, it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago. I changed my position from atheism. I've been an atheist for the last 7 years. Theism.
That occurred fairly recently, correct?
Yeah, but it's been something. I mean, I view theism like it's a very heterodox view. Like I'm not a Christian or none. I don't think any of the popular religions are correct.
Does anyone else want to chime in before I move to question number 2? Anything that anyone said thus far?
Yeah, sure. I'll speak on something. Probably the most recent change for me. So I've grown up as kind of like a suburban white male in Texas. And for most of my life, I kind of figured that racism kind of died in the 80s. But I had a friend of mine who started challenging me on viewing racism a lot more differently from the rather than from the perspective of, I don't personally like black people, to a more, I guess you could say, systemic outcomes by race group. And some of the evidence that I think has been mounting pretty high has kind of radically changed the way that I view race relations in the U.S. You know, insulated from it being from a majority white, you know, society, and particularly being here in the South, in particular being in an economic environment where I mostly just interacted with white people. So that's been something that has been probably the largest change in recent years.
Just to speed things up, I think we're only going to go an hour, and I'm going to get Aron some more air time. So I'm going to go to another big one, and then I want this to spin off into tangents if we can, and then we'll go from there. What is the single point raised by atheists or not atheists or Christians, depending on who you are? What is the single point raised by the other side that is the hardest for you to refute? We'll start with Aron.
What is the single point raised by the other side that is hardest for me to refute?
Correct.
Anything that hasn't been refuted. I mean, the best we've got, I think, asserts that what we had last night, right? Where we had General Han Solo. He gives out a handful of facts which do not imply his conclusion, and insists that this is completely consistent with and therefore supports his position. Certainly does not. But there's no way to get them to understand that, because you know, here's a rabbit with a pancake on its head. Your argument is invalid. How do you argue with that?
Right. Yeah. General.
Yeah, I firmly believe that I gave enough evidence from the text itself that corroborates with the outside extra-biblical evidence, because the claim is that the Bible is completely invalid, and it doesn't match historically, it doesn't match what we understand through science. And I was showcasing, when we spoke about Genesis 1, I was showcasing that it's consistent with an ancient Near Eastern cosmology, and it's consistent with modern science.
Neither of which is remotely true. I mean, on any point, anywhere. But I mean, his argument was that if the wrong number of the wrong group of people crossed the wrong waterway at the wrong time with no miracles and no Moses, that substantiates the Bible as historically accurate, even though we know that absolutely everything the Bible says is wrong. And that
doesn't make sense, though, because I established that.
You're right. That doesn't make sense. So when you say that it's completely consistent,
because that's a strawman argument against what I was saying.
It's not. You see, you were talking about the Hyksos rather than the Israelis. You were talking about the Reed Sea instead of the Red Sea. You were talking about 2,000 people instead of 2 million.
Yeah, but you appeal to a more critical edition of the Bible rather than the King James translation.
I'm not talking about King James. It doesn't matter what version you come up with.
You're reading from a King James. That's what you're doing.
No, I'm not reading from a King James.
King James has Red Sea, not the Sea of Reeds.
If I could step
Yam Suf is Sea of Reeds, not Red Sea.
From a spectator's point of view, I think, well, the non-believers that were watching were thinking, okay, you want to keep more and more and more diminishing the what was going on in that story. It waited for just the right time to cross that Sea of Reeds. Well, then you're taking away from the miraculous. I mean, if it's not a miracle anymore, then what is it even in there for?
Yeah, and we have to take away that we have to remember that Sargon, that Moses is adopted from Sargon and from what is it, Hammurabi, and his tale of parting the Red Sea is also, you know, seems like an adaptation of the story of Snefru, from, you know, even though it's not parting, right? So Moses' character wasn't involved regardless. So even if there was a group of people who crossed the Reed Sea, which isn't what the Bible says, that still doesn't justify any of the rest of the history.
Still Sea of Reeds. There's no way around that.
Hey, Robert, why don't you go into the
crossing a Sea of Reeds from which there is no Moses?
In fact, Yam Suf, guess what? Yam Suf occurs where Moses is placed as a baby in that raft. Okay. That's how they know that this is a Sea of Reeds. It's not the Red Sea.
In order to. So even if we were to give you that, even if I give you that one thing, fails absolutely across the board on every point.
Where does it fail?
Where?
Okay,
No,
Aaron,
historically,
here's the thing though. Here's the thing though. You say like the Bible fails everywhere. Then we go into these pretty critical examples, like say the parting of the Red Sea, and then we go into that, and you just say, okay, I'll give you that, but everywhere
Well, I
else.
said, even if I give you that, because as I said in the beginning, we expect that somewhere in this compilation of legends, there's going to be some reference to something that may have actually happened. I mean, look at the Tower of Babel, for example. I give an interpretation of what actually happened with the Tower of Babel. Is anybody familiar with it? We know that God didn't get angry because these people were trying to build a tower up to the sky to see him, so he caused all their languages to be confused. We know none of that literally happened. But we do know that with the what?
Yeah, we do.
we know that really
there's ziggurats in Ur. We can actually go there and confirm.
We can trace the evolution of language.
Which supports my point and not yours.
Okay.
Because we have ziggurats like the Marduk ziggurat, the very one that is called the Tower of Babel.
A specific ziggurat that the Genesis 11 passage speaks about actually matches the Ur location.
Right. So
in the Persian Gulf.
We can trace the etymology of language, and it doesn't comport with the Tower of Babel. Okay. So
then when we have the fall of the Mesopotamian Empire, we also had that there was public schools that were where people were being taught to read and write in cuneiform, and when the empire collapsed, they stopped teaching cuneiform, so people didn't understand the language anymore. They didn't understand written language anymore. So all of these legends were end up being held by word of mouth. We know wrong about them trying to build a tower to get to heaven to meet God. We know that the Bible is wrong about God confusing all of their languages so that this is the origin story of all the different languages. We know that is wrong, just like every other thing the Bible describes about the original language. Yet we know that there were ziggurats, and that in this particular case, we have a ziggurat on which the story is based, that being the Marduk ziggurat, the one in Babylon.
Okay. The Babylon ziggurat is actually later than the ziggurat that appears. We're talking.
This is the one that was talking by Hammurabi.
10,000, 9,000 BC, which is
1750 BC.
No, we're talking about humans that exist in that region around 9,000 BC plus.
We're talking about their descendants who now built this tower around 1750 BCE.
So guys, just in an attempt to not rehash last night, I'm just going to keep it moving. Okay. If everyone's cool with that, it's my turn. Thing that I've switched topic on. The hardest for me to counter or explain or justify. That would be the fine-tuning argument. There's between 12 and 60 physical laws and whatnot, and that has really the only counter to that I have is the weak anthropic principle and the multiverse theory. Someone's going to want to chime in on that.
Well, you know it's going to be me. Right?
Yeah. Here we go.
Because, I mean, think about it. We have, estimated 78 billion light years across in the known part of the galaxy that we can estimate, or we have any perception of whatsoever. We have untold trillions of galaxies, each galaxy representing more than 1 billion stars that might have inhabitable planets on it. So out of all of these innumerable billions of everything everywhere, all of it outside of our range, exist only on a portion of the skin of this one little piece of rock that is barely perceptible from any of the other planets. And yet all of the cosmos was somehow created for us. That the anthropic principle is that this universe was manufactured for our habitation, yet we can't habitate anywhere else.
Well, the weak anthropic principle just holds that the mere fact that we are here, sentient Homo sapiens, is perfect evidence that it necessarily wasn't made for us, but we adapt to this environment, just like Douglas Adams and the puddle theory. So,
I mean, I just I don't understand how Aaron's response could be a good response. That just he's just saying that that's unintuitive to him.
No. So what he's saying
obviously
is that
the universe, and this is the way that Neil deGrasse Tyson put it too. He said that this isn't intelligent design. This is stupid design.
Yeah, Aaron. So
Wait,
I mean, that's
so
going to
this
be.
would Aaron, this would actually be more of a counter argument than an objection, because what you're doing is you're raising the objection from bad design, but you're not challenging any of the premises of the fine tuning argument. So even if we would grant that, but that it wouldn't falsify any aspect of the fine tuning of our universe.
What Richard's saying is we have to come up with another ad hoc hypothesis besides the weak anthropic principle or the multiverse theory to explain the fine tuning argument. That's all I was going to say, and I don't really want to dwell on it. So we'll just go to Steve.
Well, I think I'd be fine dwelling on it, but if you don't want to, then...
Go for it, Richard.
Go ahead.
All right. So regarding I mean, you brought up the multiverse. I don't know if you can use that to explain improbable things. Like that would
It's still hypothetical.
Completely ad hoc, and you could really use it for anything that's improbable, like winning a hand of poker, several consecutive hands of poker. You could say, oh, I'm just in the universe where that happened, so I didn't cheat, or something like that. So I don't know. It seems like the multiverse, at least in this case, if you're using it like that, it would be ad hoc.
I agree with you, but it is still within the. It still can be observed by science.
Wait, Rich. I think Rich is confusing
two by its very definition is more probable than a miracle.
Rich is
confusing and anything supernatural.
He's conflating multiverse. Hang on.
They're using probability. They're pointing to natural laws and stuff. I don't think they're immediately claiming that it's a miracle that explains things. Josh, you had a more interesting objection. I thought I wanted to hear more of that.
Well, I just don't see how Aron's response is a response to the argument. It just seems like he's saying it's unintuitive that there would be a creator who is interested in setting up the world in such a way that life would only exist in a small portion of the universe. But
okay, it's not just that it's unintuitive. It's like, if you want to argue that if the Earth were some degree closer or further from the sun, then life wouldn't be able to exist at all.
Yeah, that's a bad.
Yeah. Hey, Aron, what do you actually think the fine-tuning argument is? Because your objections don't seem to be relevant to the way that I understand the argument.
The fine-tuning argument is that the laws of physics are within these very narrow parameters, and that all of the laws of physics had to be in these precise parameters, including the orbit of the Earth. This variance beyond, this certain tiny little range. And
the Goldilocks zone.
Yeah, and as I stated in a number of videos, including the David C. Pack, I cite a number of physicists who say that these parameters are not as narrow as they make them out.
That's correct.
And
that's correct.
Even if they were that narrow, the least efficient means imaginable for any god that wants to do anything. If they want to build a universe for humanity, you wouldn't build it this way.
what's the
Bible?
What's the argument for that claim? Why are you claiming that if a god wanted to design a
universe for human habitation, you will not design it to be such that humans cannot habitate in it, except in this little.
That's a great point.
Imagine the little cup of water that you get with a beta in it.
But that's just repeating
so you
the claim.
have beta.
Yeah. Right, but that's just repeating the claim.
People are interrupting. I can't tell what anybody's objecting.
I think he's saying you're just kind of repeating the claim. He was asking you to support that claim.
That's obviously not what I'm doing. I'm now explaining with a different means. So if you go to a pet store and you buy a beta fish, they give it to you in a little cup. You have a cup that's 67 miles out in Death Valley somewhere. There's this little cup with this beta fish in it. Now, you're going to say that you've designed Death Valley to support life?
I mean, think of a rancher. A rancher lives on a huge ranch, and there's very small parts of it that can actually sustain any life. So who cares? It depends on what the intentions of the designer are.
Right. So the argument for the anthropic principle is grossly misrepresented to begin with. That's the first part of it, because the parameters are nowhere near as precise as they imagine. And even if they were that precise, the limitations against humanity clearly state that we can't exist we will die instantly everywhere else in the universe except for this tiny little, as you would put it, or as I would put it, this little cup with the beta fish in it out in the middle of Death Valley somewhere, where that fish cannot exist anywhere outside of that cup.
But that's precisely why I put in the side chat here a link to 500 plus parameters that narrow down the fact that we're even alive. And Steve McRae's been reading a book
logical
titled
fallacy here.
Exactly.
I want you to try to understand the logical fallacies here, that no number of coincidences ever, no number of compiled coincidences could ever imply.
Really?
Hold
Even
on.
the moon formation?
That's right.
Hold on. It's just a fine tuning argument, though.
The argument from incredulity, the argument from incredulity or the argument from improbability remain fallacious arguments, no matter how incredulous or improbable you might make them out to be.
Aaron, I have an illustration that might help. This isn't original to me. I've heard this before. Say you go into the DMV and you didn't order a vanity plate, and when you get your license plate, it says the word Aron Ra. You wouldn't suspect that the DMV just randomly produced it like that. You would think that there was some sort of design behind it. So,
well, I want to thank you for giving me a great license plate idea, because you're right, that would work on a plate.
Can I?
No, I wouldn't expect that was coincidental.
Yeah.
That's true.
Can I chime in? Hey, let's move on, Steve. What is the single point raised by atheists that it's theists that it's hardest for you to explain or refute?
Well, two things real quick. One, Richard, you kept conflating the multiverse with parallel universes or quantum universes. They're not the same thing. They're completely other.
Oh, that's the hardest for you to answer.
So I just wanted to clarify that, because the Copenhagen interpretation has nothing to do with the multiverse. Well, Hugh's going to be on the show next month, so he's going to set you straight on that. But anyways, the hardest thing for me actually is, and I know this is going to sound really crappy, but am I breaking up? It's going to be subjective evidence to oneself. When somebody has an experience that only they have experienced and they cannot relate it to anybody else, the argument that they have unto themselves that a God exists is something that is only applicable to them because of an epistemic limit. It's kind of like, and I hate to use movie analogies because that's what Kent Hovind always seems to does when he comes in here and debates, but the movie Contact, where she went to another planet, seen aliens, but of course nobody believes her. There's no evidence except for the missing time per se. But to her, it was a real event. So a theist argument that says, look, I have no empirical evidence God exists. I have no scientific evidence that God exists. However, I have personal testimony for whatever reason. That's really hard to refute, especially if they have credibility, right? If they're not an incredulous person. But what's that?
That's just stating your intuition.
This is being what?
That's just stating intuition.
Mike is bad.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think it's really intuition per se, but if a person has, for example, and I don't believe this, but it's to say, oh, I've seen God. Well, I'm not going to believe you right out. Trust me on that. But if somebody has some experiences where it lends pause, then they really do believe that God exists. Maybe there's some reason for it that I'm not seeing, because they have the inability to communicate it because of that epistemic limit. That's really hard to defeat that, especially when somebody you really trust, like General. I have the utmost respect for General. He is a brilliant man. I don't agree with him theologically speaking, but I give pause to him because he might have something that I might be missing, right? So that to me is the hardest to overcome, because if a theist like General really believes this stuff very strongly, who I have the utmost respect for, I'm going to give him a little more credence than somebody else that I don't have any, value in what they say whatsoever. Does that make sense?
Good.
Yeah, but at least Steve understands that I mean, even Aron Ra mentioned that I'm honest in the sense that I actually do the research, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
Oh, quite.
Or
yes,
if
absolutely.
if I say I don't know, I don't know.
I want to state that what he just said is correct. I mean, I did say, unfortunately, it was after we were no longer on the air, and I owed him, I think, given my past liars, that when I encounter one who is not lying, and it's such an atypical occurrence, that I should actually make note of that. That General Han Solo did not give me any indication that he was lying or misrepresenting the facts. He may have been misunderstanding the facts, is a fair argument, because as I said, I don't think you could come to the assumptions that he does based on the data that he has, but he is not misrepresenting it. He was not being dishonest about it.
And that's a fair distinction to make, because we do all run into people who know they are being dishonest, whether they are tactically being dishonest, intellectually dishonest, or outright being dishonest. We see that time and time again.
We can agree on that. Yeah. Godless, what is the single point raised by theists that is hardest for you to counter, explain, or justify? Godless. To Heretic.
Hello.
If you are not.
Hi, Heretic. I love you.
You got an answer for us?
I have yet to encounter anything that I couldn't really get past. Like what Steve said with the personal experience, I counter that with, well, that's hearsay, and that comes right from Thomas Paine, who said that, you know, revelation is only useful for the person the revelation, everything else is hearsay. So if somebody tells me that they've had this profound experience, it doesn't matter if it's my best friend. I'm going to say, well, I'm glad you had that experience, but that doesn't prove anything to me. So I haven't really encountered anything that I haven't. Now, I don't argue a lot of science. I'm more of a history nerd, but so far I haven't come up to anything that I didn't feel comfortable that I could refute.
Yeah. Heretic woman, while personal experiences wouldn't be an argument, it's not something I can give to you, but it would certainly change the conversation, because this person that you're talking to has some sort of internal justification for their belief, even if you don't share it. So it's like if you have any interest in convincing them of anything, you would almost have fun yourself because you want to convince them, and to do that.
And I could come up with numerous ways of explaining why that may have happened. I've had experiences that at the time I kind of went, oh, was that something profoundly, you know, maybe supernatural? And through study of psychology and sociology and things like that, I've never come across something that couldn't have some kind of natural explanation. And there's a lot of evidence of people fooling themselves, wishful thinking, and they don't even know they're doing it. And I've been guilty of that myself. And to me, it's far more reasonable to think, maybe I'm fooling myself into thinking something's true that I really, really want to be true than, you know, supernatural stuff.
Yeah.
Reasonable.
You know, there's another word for supernatural, because I mean, supernatural has too many syllables. Magic only has 2.
Good.
I'm fine with magic. I really like the Chronicles of Narnia, and it's opened me up more to calling it magic, so I'm fine with it.
There you go.
That's a great series.
Zachary,
Yes.
you got anything? Go for it.
Sure. So I'm coming from a theistic perspective. I'm a Christian. And I think that probably the single toughest argument to interact with would be the argument from divine hiddenness. I don't necessarily think it's a powerful argument, but it is an argument that I think is very difficult to interact with, just because it doesn't seem clear to me evidence that you could marshal in opposition to it. So if someone says, it seems like there is no God, and someone else says, well, it seems like there is a God because I feel like I've experienced him, then you're kind of at an impasse.
Like absence of evidence is evidence of absence?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, the
something
problem-
kind of like that.
The problem, I think the problem with that line of argumentation is just that while an experience might be predicted on a specific strain of theism, so it could be evidence for that individual, they're not going to have any reason to favor that explanation over any other ad hoc explanation that generates the same prediction. So if I just postulated some naturalistic mechanism in their brain that gives them this euphoric feeling that they think is a theistic experience, they're not going to have any reason to prefer the theistic argument over the naturalistic argument. So it shouldn't be considered a good explanatory hypothesis for their experience.
Yeah, that's one way to go. There's another version that I think is a little more powerful, and I wish I could remember the source. I got it from Justin Schieber, but I don't remember where he got
Justin
it from.
Bieber?
Which is
the great theologian
Schieber.
Justin
Go
Bieber.
ahead.
Yes.
Schieber, yeah. Well, the argument goes along the lines of Christianity, well, specifically Christianity, but most theistic entail that there is no honest unbeliever, I think is what it is. So something to the effect of that if Christianity were true, then God is all loving and he wants everyone to be saved, or at least he wants everyone who is not saved to be unsaved because of their stubborn rebellion. In other words, he doesn't want anyone to be unsaved because of lack of evidence. So that means that if Christianity is true, then then every unbeliever is in some sense non-genuine. They're resisting for emotional reasons or something like that.
Yeah,
but the problem is there do appear to be genuine non-believers, people who legitimately say, I'm open to it, I'm not emotionally objective to it, I just haven't seen enough evidence. So the conclusion there would be that the phenomenon, genuine unbelievers, is on Christianity, and so the existence of genuine unbelievers would be evidence against it.
What about the wealth of
the
people who walk away from belief? I mean, they once believed, and then, I mean, look at the Clergy Project, for example. These are people that are not only invested emotionally, but they're invested financially. And there are hundreds of them that say, you know what, I can't buy my own bullshit anymore.
Yeah,
but
God bless your boyfriend.
Well, I think the more robust example would be there's 30,000 years of known religion. That's like 20,000 years being very, very helpful, charitable. 20,000 years of people who were probably perfectly open to joining a loving relationship with God, but never doing so just because theism didn't arise until, what is it, like 8,000 years ago or something?
No, theism actually goes back to the agricultural 1,000 years ago.
Okay, so thousands of years, nonetheless, of people who were had the same cognitive faculties, ready to be God's BFF, but merely due to historical happenstance, they never joined a loving relationship with God. It's like if you have a loving God that wants to be in a relationship with you, then it's inconsistent with the existence of all these different types of non-resistant non-believers. That's the argument. And what's frustrating, this is my answer, by the way, to the question. It's frustrating letting people know that this is a distinct question from the problem of evil. We're pointing out two issues. One of them is...
I'm sorry.
Aron usually has his parrots in the background, but
that was his parrot. No, just kidding. His parrot sounds like a cat, and his cat sounds like a dog, and his dog sounds like a horse. It's all messed up over there.
Jim, I'd like to answer if I could.
Oh, did I skip you?
Oh well, I know you're not having everyone do it because we have a bunch of people here.
Well, I got Jack and Andrew, and then I'm done. Now I want to give Josh a chance to ask his question. Richard.
Oh, okay. Actually, my answer is kind of similar to Zach's, the whole divine hiddenness thing, but mine is a little different. So you have people who say that they were once Christians, or they tried to seek out Christian explanations. They tried to find God, but they just couldn't find him. And yet this would be what the Bible predicts, because the Bible tells us that if you're legitimately looking for God, that he'll reveal himself to you. But you have people who don't experience that, who think that they are legitimately looking for God, and they cannot find him, and
that's us.
Right, and they are still struggling with for example, if they are trying to overcome some kind of sin in their life, and they think that they're seeking God to help, and he will help them with that sin, but they never find help with it. Like they're struggling with this and they never find help. And that would be a problem that I would have. So the main way to respond to that would be to say something like what Zach said, they're just being insincere. They don't really want to find God. They're fooling themselves, basically. And the thing is, me trying to be a charitable person, I don't want to look at people like that. I don't want to say like, oh, you're fooling yourself. I don't want to tell people that, you know. I don't want to have to say to somebody, no, you, sir, you are not really believing what you're telling me that you're believing, because that seems unfair of me because I don't know this person, you know. So that would be, I think that would be probably for me, the most significant thing.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
That's my question.
Okay, Josh, you're
sorry,
guys.
you're breaking up.
You're
breaking up still.
There you go. Go ahead.
I was saying that response is a question-begging response. The response they give you that they're not genuinely seeking that response begs the question.
What do you mean?
The only reason for accepting that response is because you want to resist that the conclusion is true.
Okay, not really. If you accept like biblical anthropology, like the biblical doctrine of what man is, then you will have this notion that man is a fallen creature. Man is inherently sinful. So it's not designed specifically to avoid the conclusion. It just flows out of biblical doctrines.
So what I'm saying is that the only reason that you have to reject a person's testimony is because you already accept the conclusion that Christianity is true.
Yeah. See what you're saying.
The argument is against Christianity, so you can't just say, well, I assume Christianity is true, so therefore an argument is wrong, right? That's a question begging.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I get what you're saying.
Response.
Yeah, Richard, the reason you're not an atheist is because you're not sincerely trying to be an atheist. That's what your problem is.
Well, you're not working hard enough.
Well, that would be Zach, that would be a little different because there's no atheist anthropology where.
Oh, do we lose Jim there? We go AFK.
Heretic, where have we met?
You have to go to.
Oh, we've met at ReasonCon, Reason Rally, and there was one place before that too.
Yeah, how do you forget? How do you forget her, right?
I try, you know.
Hey,
what was that, Aaron?
I'd like to ask Aaron something since we're waiting for Jim.
Yeah.
Would you say that you are opposed to more exclusively creationism and the aspects of religion that oppose science, or are you interested in all religion? What would you say your main areas of opposition are?
I think religion is almost exclusively supported by logical fallacies. Real contention is against creationism because that's not just fallacious, that's openly dishonest. That requires a denial of reality that is an active denial, where you actually have to deliberately, knowingly misrepresent the facts in order to defend your position.
Okay, yeah, and I assume that now that you are getting involved in politics, that would be even more of an issue because of the school systems.
Yes, and our testimony before the House, for example, revealed that. I was amazed at seeing people that were supporting these creationist bills at the State House, not just disingenuous, but are blatantly, obviously misrepresenting the case. You have to wonder whether criminal charges can become, an issue here, because I mean this is so openly dishonest that everything that somebody says, were they under oath, I'd be able to assure a conviction of perjury.
Yeah. Yeah, so something that irritates me about that is when people are stepping outside of their area of expertise and challenging like a mainstream view, like a politician, for example. A politician is probably not a scientist, and they will stand before a group of people and say like evolution is wrong and here's why. But the thing is, they're not scientists and they're not citing peer-reviewed literature. They're just giving some rhetorical nonsense that they picked up on the internet somewhere.
Because of something I read on InfoWars.
Jack, have you gotten a chance to answer the question yet? We're going to go to Jack, and then I'm going to open it up to Josh for his question for Aron.
And what's the question again?
What is the single point raised by the other side that is hardest for you to counter or explain or justify?
Well, I'm an atheist, and I think that most of the standard theistic arguments are successful. So I do think that every theistic argument can be defeated, but I do think that the argument from reason is a much more interesting argument than any of the others. I don't think any of the others really bear scrutiny. They're very easily disposed of, but I think that one is kind of interesting to think through.
Mister, I didn't give you a chance. Real quick, if you want to jump in. Or Andrew.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, can you hear me?
Did you get the question?
Are you talking to me? Oh, right, yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I'm a Christian, and the question was, what do I find the hardest from a non-believing view? I would say probably because Christian, so going back to having a personal experience, is I was raised in a Christian family, but that was eroding very quickly, but I had a personal experience of God. So I guess that's the strongest reason why I'm a Christian, as well as I believe there's influential reasons, but when people point out other religions where people themselves have experiences, if a defeater for me.
Andrew, did you have anything before I open it up to Josh?
Yeah, so for me, I would say that I'm a philosophy student. So for me, the argument kind of came when I was kind of grilling myself, as you know I tend to do from time to time. And I would say the biggest one is, and I'm a theist, by the way. We as theists believe that God is a necessary being, and that would entail his attributes be necessary as well. And so the reason why the Trinity would be necessary is a big problem, I would say, for us. It's something that's definitely difficult to explain why it had to be 3 rather than, say, 4 or 2 or any other number. I would say that would be the hardest one for me to answer right now. I'd have to pour more work into it and kind of see where that goes.
I wish I could jump in.
Well, who says it is?
Go ahead, Aron.
Sorry.
Trinity is necessary is because, one, you had the Hindu Trimurti, and they're not that far away in time. And so you also had the contradiction that had to be reconciled, where in Isaiah 45, 5, 6, and 7, God says that there is no other gods beside him, yet Jesus crops up and says that he sits on the right hand of power. And God says in the first commandment that thou shalt have no other gods before me, but then Jesus comes in and says that the only way to get to the Father is through me. So in order to reconcile these contradictions, you have to make up that Jesus is God somehow, even though Jesus never.
Not really. Okay, so hold on, Robert. Let's take this verse, Isaiah 45:7. God says, "There is no other beside me." I would take that to be the Trinity talking. There's no one else beside me.
After the fact, though, I mean, you have the contradiction was set up by Christianity, which obviously the Jews don't. The Jews aren't thinking about.
Yeah, we increase our we change our views with further evidence.
I mean, for me too, when I say why is the Trinity necessary, I'm not talking about necessary for Christianity or necessary belief for Christians. I'm talking specifically in the philosophical sense. Why would it be philosophical?
It's only
actually, Andrew, in Richard Swinburne's book, Was Jesus God? He kind of went into that. I don't really like his argument. I don't think you can do what he did because he went the whole love route.
Yeah, I don't like that argument either. So yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to spend more time looking into it. But I would say that's probably the hardest one for me to respond to.
Well, I have a question.
I wish I could respond to that, but anyway, we can go on.
Well, I have a question.
General, go ahead.
Sorry.
Like Aron to be in the room when I'm responding to that.
Okay. While we have this time, Joe, if I don't think I called on you yet.
Oh, I gave my.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Response, but,
Josh, are you there?
yeah.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, you want to get your question ready?
No.
Aron is sitting down now. Here we go.
Oh, so I can speak?
Go ahead, General, and then Josh, with your final question.
Okay, so Aron, have you looked at Isaiah 47 verse 8, where Babylon says that there is none besides me?
Obviously, yes.
So would you then say that there's no other nations beside Babylon?
Are we talking about, I'm sorry, we talking about God speaking? At that time, there probably wasn't, from their perspective, but I don't know.
There was. No. Construction is all about uniqueness.
Okay.
It's not denying the existence of other gods. It's basically saying, which Richard brought up, being, in this case, a binitarian understanding of... they didn't have a Trinitarian understanding until later in Isaiah. But the point is, he's saying, there's no parable to me. And the same construction is used where Babylon says, there's no other nation beside me.
I'm sorry,
so
it's
completely consistent with the New Testament theology of what's known as the two powers in heaven.
Okay. And somebody else is talking to me while you're talking to me. I apologize. So I'm not really, my apologies. You know how that is. So anyway, so Babylon is saying that they're the only other nation, and there is no nation besides them. So in this context,
exactly.
if they're aware that there is Egypt, and that Egypt is definitely a nation besides.
They're not saying that Babylon's not saying that there's literally no other nation. What the construction, and you see this in the Rosh Hashanah parallel text. The construction is, God, I am the person, or I'm the entity you ought to obey, because there's none like me.
So there's no, we are head and shoulders above the rest. There is no one
exactly.
like.
So it's not denying the existence of other nations. So when God says there's no other God besides me, he's not denying the divine council.
In Isaiah 45 is that there are other nations, even though he says that he created light and he created
Isaiah 47:8.
We're talking about Babylon now is saying that they're the only nation, or that they're the most important nation, or that they're head and shoulders above the rest. And so we're supposed to take that and compare that to Isaiah 45, where God says that he is the only God, and that he created light, and he created darkness, and he created evil, and nobody else did that.
Yeah, there's no other Elohim that's comparable to Yahweh.
Okay, so he's saying that there's nobody else besides him. He's absolutely alone.
No. I just explained that.
No, Aron, in Psalm 82, it explicitly says that God has taken his place amongst the other gods, and in the midst of the divine council, he administers judgment.
Describes that he has created the light and the darkness, and he created good and evil. So then if you look at the Bhagavad Gita again, which is centuries earlier than that, well, then we have Krishna making the same claims about himself. Because one thing we know about gods and the way that they dictate scripture is they're enormous egomaniacs.
General, did I back up a little? Did I just hear you say that the Old Testament talks about the Trinity?
Yeah, the Old Testament, no, I specifically said the understanding of the God of Israel was more fully.
Or was it the Trinity?
Well,
because I have a quote here from The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, quoted by Ben Witherington.
I don't consider Lee Strobel a scholar.
I know. I understand. It's not a source. It's not a source.
Can I just take a moment to revel? Can I just take a moment to revel in what General Han Solo just said? Because that was brilliant. I just want to savor the face.
Whenever I have my own, even my own church had that latest Lee Strobel movie come out, I was cringing. I just
I won't even read
Jim, I think. Hold on, Jim. I think I can anticipate what you're asking, though. You're basically you have a quote from Ben Witherington that says that the Trinity is not explicit in the Old Testament.
Damn, dude, you are good.
Okay, so and Robert and I would agree with that. What Robert would say though is by appealing to the temples, the second temple period, you can find traces of a
maybe
a tradition with powers in heaven, and basically to Yahweh,
which is very unique amongst any ancient Near Eastern text. So you have two Yahwehs, one invisible, one visible. Then Jesus says, "I'm the second one that appears in the Old Testament."
Hey, this is a good time for Josh to ask his last question for Aron.
Yeah, so I've been watching quite a few of your videos, and in a lot of your videos, you appeal to natural selection, but I don't understand how natural selection could be a scientific hypothesis, given that it doesn't generate specific predictive expectations, yet
it does.
Yeah.
It purports to in a lot of cases, but I don't see a way in natural selection to disambiguate between two coextensive traits. In that it can't disambiguate between two coextensive traits. It can't say amongst those two coextensive traits which was selected for.
You understand that there are multiple mechanisms of evolution, and the natural selection does not always apply. But the one that always applies is genetic drift, right?
Right, but I'm saying that natural selection can't be a mechanism.
What I'm lost at how you can say that. So when you have an organism that there's a mutation, because all evolution is just a change in proportion, whether it's physiological, morphological, or genetic. I'd say, or chemical, I should have said. So morphological distinction, let's say we have a waterfowl, we have a bird that it exists near the water line, that engages in the water, that hunts for fish, if you will. And then we have mutations that can make the feathers more oily and then resistant. So that enhances that bird's ability to hunt for fish. We have foot webbing that can or that might occur in a seabird, and if it occurs in a land bird, well, obviously that's no advantage at all. So if we have something along the lines of an ostrich born with webbed footing, well, the webbed footing is not going to inherit an advantage. It'll actually reduce that bird's ability to run.
What you're doing there, though, is you're appealing to individual causal histories, but you're not doing any appeal to natural selection, right? Because given those same ecologies, first of all, whatever, like, let's say it's the oily feathers, right? That's going extensive with some other phenotypic trait. Now, if it's also coextensive with that other phenotypic trait, and someone were to contest that, no, what's being selected for is this other, rather than the fact that it repels water, right? Natural selection doesn't have an answer to that question. It can't weed out the two. The only way in which you end up weeding out the two is by appeal to some other causal history. But I mean,
I don't see that. No, because as you said, you always have genetic drifts occurring in every random direction, and that natural selection only applies when the variance actually produces a benefit or a disadvantage that will be immediately weeded out. So let's just ignore the ones that will be the detriments will be weeded out immediately already anyway, but the advantages will be selected for. The web will obviously be an advantage, and so they are going to, if you look at the terms of like population mechanics, the ones with the webbed footing mutation are going to proliferate better than those without the web footing, and this may be several generations. It could be hundreds of generations before the entire population shares that mutation.
That might look, even if everything you said was true, natural selection,
and of course it is, because I said it, or I wouldn't have said it if it weren't.
That's true. Why would he say something that was false? That would be silly of him.
Even if everything that you said was true, that doesn't get around the objection I'm making, because I'm saying that there's going to be what's called a ride-along trait with whatever phenotypic variation you're saying is being selected for, right? Now, there's a difference between being selected and being selected for. In selected for, there is going to be content to that. But natural selection, there's nothing in natural selection that's going to provide you that content. So if I were to contest, like, let's say in the case of, there are standard examples of hearts making thumping noises, right? And them also pumping blood. Now, what you want to say is that the trait that was selected for was the pumping blood rather than the thumping noises. But every time we get pumping blood, we also get thumping noises, right?
Okay.
Right, and so if someone were to say, no, what was being selected for was, if someone were to say what's being selected for was the thump noises, you couldn't have, there's no way to respond to that by appeal to natural selection, right? You're going to have to start appealing to other things.
Can you cite some kind of advantage in reproduction from a thump noise?
Well, there may be a reproductive advantage, but that's not relevant.
I mean, we look at the origin of the heartbeat actually precedes the heart. You know, they look at it in cnidarians, they look at it in jellyfish.
Listen, how is that relevant to the objection I've read?
I have no idea how your objection is relevant.
I see. They're not saying that we can't identify what's being selected for. It's clear that it was the blood pumping. It was the pump, not the thump noise. But what you're using to identify it isn't natural selection. That's the problem.
Okay, so in Kettlewell's the speckled moths example, I mean, I like the favorite example of that, where Darwin explained what natural selection was, and nobody had ever seen it in action until they saw the peppered moths, and then realized, okay, well, yeah, that's actually natural selection occurring. Does this how does natural selection not apply in this case?
The question is that whatever the coextensive traits may be, that is to say, there are traits that ride along with them being able to camouflage into their environment. That's one phenotypic trait, is the camouflage. Whatever the color is, there's going to be a number of other phenotypic traits that are also going to...
In an individual, I could see that, but not in population mechanics. If you're looking at populations over many generations, then I wouldn't see that.
Well, I don't understand. You're saying that there aren't going to be coextensive traits with any phenotype?
When we're talking about natural selection, we're talking about population mechanics. We're talking about over successive generations, where one trait has a reproductive advantage over any other. So if you're saying that any alteration or any variation will have to necessarily come attached to some other variance, you seem to be implying that other variance, whatever it is, would somehow be inextricable, and I can't think of a single example of that in nature.
Well, listen. All right, so maybe this will be easier. If you take a given ecology, it's not as if you can predict, given that ecology, what phenotypic traits are going to win out, because of the fact that there are going to be multitudes of presumably contradictory phenotypic traits in that ecology, right? So like, take long necks for giraffes. You inhabit the same ecology that lions do, but lions don't have long necks. So it's not as if there's some law that given this ecology, we should expect long necks, right? So
why would lions have long necks?
Yeah, you're talking difference between carnivores and herbivores at this point.
Exactly.
And also, can I note that natural selection, Josh, doesn't exactly select for things; it selects against as well. And mostly the fact that dead things don't breed, right? And when you're talking about a phenotypical trait, let's say, like the example I used for natural selection that I ran against Dr. Sarfati was basically very simple. You have a population of bugs; they have mottled colors, they're black and white, and the mutation for the white color exists in the population.
Cutting out, Steve.
Yeah, you're cutting out a lot.
Let me refresh my hangout.
Cutting out, Steve.
1 sec.
Yeah, I apologize for your mic cutting out like that.
Okay, is that better?
A nest of eggs. We've seen that we have the oviraptor skeleton sitting like a chicken next to these eggs, next to, not on top of. It has the eggs gathered around it, and then it has its arms draped over it in a way that wouldn't make any sense unless the animal had feathers on its wings. And then for all of the other maniraptors of that type, we found that there actually are feathers on the wings.
It occurs to me I've never heard you talk about Tiktaalik. Bet you have something to
Tiktaalik was
say
never
about that.
very interesting to me.
But I don't think
interesting to me.
Tiktaalik is a Cantostego with a net.
I don't.
Aaron, I have a question. Are you reading from the Book of Genesis?
Okay. Jim, can I get a mic check?
Because I'm gonna, Aaron, I'm gonna use your argument just then and actually refute the young creationists and then use Genesis 1:20.
Am I not audible?
One sec, Jack.
Yeah, we can be.
Somebody asked if they were audible.
Yeah, so I don't think Aaron is understanding Josh's objection. The point is that when you have two coextensive traits, right, appeal to the mechanism of natural selection doesn't predict which one will move to efficiency.
Well, that's what if my mic works, I can tell you that why it will.
Sorry, what doesn't predict which one will move to fixation, rather. So I think that's the reason why it doesn't seem like it can be an explanatory mechanism.
You sound fine now, Steve.
All right, so hang on one sec. So, Josh, I mean, first of all, what type of natural selection are you talking about? Because in the peppered moth, which was a directional selection, is the same thing from my example with the white and the black bugs. If you have a phenotype where that mutation is white and the climate changes, so you have selective pressure that is like snow, right? Those bugs are going to blend in more with the whiter color, right? And so predators are not going to see them. Therefore, the ones with the darker colors, they're going to get eaten. They're going to be selected out. They're going to be selected against. And so in the population, the mutation that has that white color is going to be more fixated eventually down the line. Eventually, the whole population will become white, correct? That's what's called directional selection, right? So that is the fact that not so much the white is being selected for, but it's being selected against for the ones that don't have it.
In that instance, those are two different phenotypic traits, right? You're just combining the two phenotypic traits and you're claiming it's one trait. The one trait is that it blends in with the environment. That's a phenotypic trait. The other is the color. Now, you can't say which is selected for by appeal to natural selection, right? The intuitive notion is that it's selected for because it confers a reproductive advantage in the species. That's the intuitive notion. But if someone were to say it's simply in virtue of the whiteness that it were selected, and the fact that it conferred a reproductive advantage is immaterial to why it was selected, wouldn't that generates the same? Sorry, that phenotype is also so natural selection doesn't have the tools to tell you which was selected for, and the same thing goes for traits that are selected against. Those traits that are selected against also presumably selected against some other ride-along traits.
But you do agree Fodor's argument Fodor's argument, Jerry Fodor's argument is about philosophy more than it is biology.
You're cutting in and out.
God damn it.
What's that?
I was going to say Fodor's argument is more philosophy than it is biology, right?
But the point is that it's an objection. The point is that it's an objection from philosophy of science. So you're just saying that it's in virtue of the fact that natural selection doesn't predict which trait will win out in virtue of natural selection. It's going to be in virtue of some history that you're going to explain why.
But the trait is the phenotype, right?
I'm just going to say this. I'm not denying Genesis 1:20 because Aron Ra agrees with it.
Exactly. But if you look at Genesis 1:20, it teaches pretty much exactly what you're saying.
The trait is the phenotype that's based upon the genome. That's the only thing I remember. Fodor's argument has never been a great argument. He tries to make the nuances of the coextensive properties of things that non-relating to biology, because the trait being selected for in this particular kind is the mutation that's being selected for or selected against the ones that don't have it.
Steve, the reason that you don't understand is that the genotypes they're also going to be coextensive with the phenotypes, both phenotypes that are selected, and the one that was selected for. Both are selected to the genotype to rectify which one was selected for. But Josh, the phenotype is consistent with both the ride-along.
But Josh, natural selection can only act upon a non-neutral mutation. As Aron was saying, they all affected by genetic drift, which can affect anything, including a natural mutation, a neutral mutation. So what is being selected for is the mutation itself is being selected to be beneficial to the organism to survive, to reproduce.
What you're saying isn't addressing the objection, which is that if natural selection doesn't predict which of the two coextensive traits is the one that would move to fixation if they were deconfounded, then it can't actually be an explanatory mechanism.
But it does predict. It predicts the one. If you have two organisms, one has the mutation, one does not, natural selection will predict the one with the mutation that's beneficial for it to reproduce is the one that's going to get selected for.
No, the point is it doesn't predict which one is going to be beneficial.
It does with respect to what does with respect to the environment and the selective pressures.
The reason why it matters is that if you say, why did this trait move to fixation rather than the other? And the answer is because it was naturally selected. Then natural selection has to predict which of the two traits is going to be the one that moves to fixation, but it doesn't predict that.
Well, if you can pick out which one is going to be beneficial to the organism, then of course you can predict it.
What's explanatory there is the properties in virtue of which, right, it moves to fixation, right? That is the properties in virtue of which it contributes to reproductive efficiency. But then that's not appealing to natural selection. That's appealing to those properties, which is what's doing the explanatory work there. So natural selection is just explanatorily empty in that instance.
I don't follow that, no.
Look, if you have two traits, right, that are coextensive. Let's say hearts both pump blood and they also make thump noises, right? Just by appealing to natural selection alone, right? Can I predict which of those two traits is going to be the one if they were deconfounded that would move to fixation?
Jack is right on that. I mean, Jack is right on this particular argument. Jack is right in this regard.
Thump noises have nothing to do with procreate.
Natural selection doesn't tell you. Natural selection doesn't tell you which one of those two traits is going to be the one that's reproductively efficient, right? In some environments, it might be the case that having thump noises is going to contribute to reproductive efficiency.
Can you conceive of an environment where thump?
No, that's not really.
That's
wait a minute.
That's where I'm losing.
But again, it doesn't matter.
You're aware that the assumption, right, of evolutionary biologists is that in some cases, for instance, being large will confer a reproductive advantage, and in other cases, being small will confer a reproductive advantage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's clearly the case, right, that it's going to be relative to the environment. So appealing to natural selection alone isn't going to tell you which of the two traits is going to move to fixation when you deconfound them.
Understanding even why you keep saying appeal to.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be the explanatory mechanism, natural selection. That's why I'm saying you appeal to it, because it's supposed to be that which is doing the explanatory work.
It predicts based on what's going to be the advantage in whatever environment the organism ends up being.
Right. Relative to
the same organism being large in one environment could be an advantage. You pick it up, you move it to another area, that becomes a complete disadvantage. Natural selection tells you that based on where it is, it becomes one or the other. It's not, natural selection is not reading a palm where it's going to, your lifeline is this long and this and that's going to happen. It's based on the environment where the organism is.
Yeah, but all right, let me address something that question there had that I thought was a decent question. So I'll try to explain it. You were saying, you asked something like, well, can you think of an example in which a possible environment in which the trait that is more beneficial is the thump noises as opposed to the pumping blood, right? That's right. And that seems trivially easy, because something like the function of pumping blood is to move oxygen to the brain and other vital organs, right? Now, if you can get oxygen, if you're in an environment and let's say we evolved a series of mechanisms such that there happens to be some transport method from blood, but it's actually, that could be vestigial, right? Like you might have another way of extracting oxygen that doesn't require the movement of blood circulation, but that the heart still happens to do that, but it's actually a sort of vestige, right? It's not necessary. But however, the thump noises happens to scare away more predators.
Okay,
right?
Josh. First of
So
all,
in that,
how's the heart phenotypical trait?
Mm-hmm.
In that possible environment, right? What's going to be selected is the thump noises, or what's going to be conducive to reproductive efficiency is going to be the thump noises,
right?
Not blood, right? And so the point is that natural selection, it's not in virtue of natural selection that we're saying that the thump is advantageous. It's in virtue of some sort of environmental properties, the relation between the environment.
But that's what natural selection is. That's the whole point of it.
I don't think you understand what I'm saying. I'm saying that natural selection isn't predicting.
It is. It's predicting. It's always going to predict what is the most advantageous thing in the environment it is. So if that means the heart is already vestigial and the noise,
it's entirely post hoc, right? See, whichever, if you were to confound the two traits and
natural selection is not a fortune-telling mechanism.
And you, right? The reason why it's vacuous to appeal to it is if you deconfound the two traits and run a trait competition, right? Whichever trait would win out, you would say was the one that was selected. Right?
But it is.
And that's the problem.
Like I said, natural selection is not a fortune-telling mechanism.
That for an explanatory mechanism, right, to informatively explain some event, it has to actually rule out one possibility and rule in another.
Why?
Hey, Jack, let me ask you a question.
Right.
Jack,
because when something
hang on.
predicts
Before we go on,
everything, it predicts nothing.
It doesn't, though.
Hang on, Jack. Can I ask you a question, Jack? Wait, hang on, Jack, do you think Fordor's argument is a good argument? Yes or no?
Yeah, it's a good argument.
Do you think it's a valid argument against natural selection?
Yes.
Okay, then James Downer will be happy to. James Downer, he'll be happy to have a conversation on his next program with the Evolution Hour with him specifically on that. I don't think Fordor's argument is a good argument. I understand it. I understand the coextensive properties talked about. But I don't think why it's a good argument.
If somebody
because
thinks it's not
only
a good
in a
argument,
vacuum
they
without
should
being
be able to show.
It's only in
where there's
conditions
an
where there's
error in
no
our
environmental
reasoning.
selective pressures that'll be relative. There are coextensive properties, yes.
Not only do I not think it's a good argument, I don't think it's an argument.
Oh, I think Aron Ra's dogs are on the mic again.
Yeah, the point is that the reason it's an argument is that the hypothesis is not scientific in virtue of the fact that it doesn't do any ex ante work, right? And so that term just means predict before the fact, right? It's entirely when Jack said it's post hoc, he's saying it's entirely in virtue of these traits after we can find.
I completely get what you're saying, and I disagree 100%.
Josh, if you have a selective pressure, such as the snow coming in, which is white, and you have two bugs in a population, one are completely black, one are completely white, could you not say, given those conditions, non-randomly, because natural selection is non-random, there will be a natural selection that eventually cause the mutation, the organisms with the mutation for the white phenotype to have a better chance at reproduction? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Then there you go. That's natural selection.
Mr.
We can predict it.
I think Mr's trying to get in.
Yeah, can I just say, I think the issue here is falsifiability, and I think maybe that's the key issue. I don't know. But I think, so let's just apply this to a real world scenario. Humans' love of music. Okay, how are we going to predict that then? Let's look at some predictive power and some falsifiability. Scenarios would make the human ability to love and appreciate music picked for natural selection, and what scenarios wouldn't, and how did it get here in that regard? And let's see, and how will we know to falsify it? How will we know to falsify natural selection as the only mechanism? Because I think one of the key issues here is that even if it is a mechanism, only mechanism for explanatory, maybe there's others.
He's talking about using natural selection as a predictive feature.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we look at sea lions, for example, and we were to compare them with seals, right? If we wanted to improve a sea lion, what would be the way to do that? You know, if we want to improve a sea lion in the direction of being a seal, we would follow the trends that seals have already taken. And if we wanted to improve a sea lion for its ability on land, then we would be regressing back to its bear stage. Right, so which trait applies here?
Yep, but
most of us, I think, would expect that the seal is the more advanced version of that line of evolution, so that the sea lion would lose the ability to walk on its flippers. It would be reduced to seal-like status, but it would be also able to survive deeper dives and so forth. Would lose the external ears and that sort of thing. I mean, I don't understand where we're going with whatever mutation. A reproductive advantage must then be counterbalanced against some other hypothesized mutation that's somehow correlated with that, and that would only be the case if you can't separate the two. If one actually impedes the development of the other one.
So let me just see, like, let's see if I can just maybe ask a question that might help things clear it. So when we're saying it's post hoc, we're saying that after we discover that some trait confers a reproductive advantage, we attribute that to natural selection, right? That's post hoc is because we already know that the trait confers a reproductive advantage. It's not the case, however, that you can generate from natural selection, like if you hypothesize natural selection in and of itself, it's not as if you can generate the predicted expectation of which phenotype will be beneficial, right? The issue is that the reason hypotheses have explanatory power, the reason that they explain phenomena is in virtue of the predictions that they generate. And the problem with natural selection is that it doesn't generate any ex ante predictions. Like what I was talking about earlier with the ecology, right? If you have a given ecology, natural selection can't tell you what's going to be beneficial in that ecology, given the fact that in that ecology, they're going to be, like, being very small might be advantageous, and also being very large might be advantageous.
So what is your contention?
Right, so natural selection has to, so like, listen, if one were to say that natural selection predicts in this ecology that being large will be beneficial, then we could have a falsifiable, theory, right? Because then we say, then we could say that, well, there are very small creatures in this environment.
I think you're making a mistake here.
We've then falsified natural selection.
Let me see if I can address it. I'm going to address this the best way that I possibly can. Convergent evolution, there's a number of different organisms that have tried the same environmental niche and have been required by the parameters of that environmental niche to adopt a similar shape. For example, if you look at an ichthyosaur is what happens if you try to make a dolphin out of a reptile. Something that looks very much like a lizard, which is very different than what the dolphin's ancestors look like to begin with, but they end up having a very similar shape. And there are crocodiles adopted a fish-like shape, so that they're actually Paleozoic crocodiles that have the fish tail as opposed to a crocodile tail. And there are lizards, actual lizards, the mosasaurs. Some of them developed that fish tail. Right, so these are convergent evolutionary traits, but they're all following the same niche. They're all facing the same physical demands, being driven the same direction. That there's an ideal shape that, you know, for this type of environment. And
I might be able to ask a simpler question. So that's where you're going. This might make things easier. What observation would falsify natural selection?
That's a good question, because if we have a trait that is obviously advantageous in a population such that it would produce, as we saw with Catwell's experiments, species of moth or one variance of moth, one phenotype of moth survives in a dynamic environment better than the original version, or in other experiments where we have introduction of diseases versus one line of fish that are both asexual and sexual reproducers. When you introduce disease or you introduce parasites, you understand that the sexual reproducers dominate over the asexual reproducers because they have a better resistance to both of those things.
Right, but
without that, in an environment where there aren't these other diseases or parasites, then they switch back to the asexual, because without those other threats, the asexual reproducers are more efficient.
But I don't. How does that answer my question? I'm asking for a specific observation. Like, all right, let's make a parallel with a different scientific theory. So, like, let's say general relativity. If I were to ask you, were to falsify general relativity, you would say, well, look, if I looked around a massive body of objects,
You're going to lose me if you talk about physics. Okay, I'm very isolated.
Do you know that? What do you know about the phenomena of gravitational lensing, to say the least?
No, I really don't. If you could talk about physics, you're going to be outside of anything that I understand.
I do too. I could hang with that.
If you want me to understand your question, please stay within evolutionary biology.
Well, if I can probably just explain it to you so that you would understand it. It's very simple. A layman can
Are we going to talk about physics, or are we going to talk about evolutionary biology?
Making an analogy to help it sink in. So,
your analogy help me, or will your analogy be talking about physics?
He's talking about how you make a prediction. Hold on. He's talking about how you make predictions in science and how you can falsify a theory. That seems like it's relevant to evolutionary biology.
Well, but if we
go ahead, Josh. Go ahead, Josh.
I need to have something within evolutionary biology and understand why he even has a contention.
I want to know the observation that falsifies the theory.
But Josh, I think your main contention is off.
What is that observation?
Okay, so what you're saying is should a mutation arise, we could predict and enhance or improve an organism's ability to function in that environment. Somehow, that improved functionality does not have a reproductive advantage that we would predict that it would have. That it instead diminishes somehow. Is that what you're saying?
I'm asking if there's something that's predicted on the hypothesis that if we were to not observe that prediction, it would falsify the hypothesis.
Okay. So what you're saying is if we have a number of mutations happening all the time, because as I said, genetic drift is in operation all the time, so that one mutation offers a predictable advantage to a given organism in a given environment, that there would somehow not be a reproductive advantage?
No, I'm not asking that.
In that, it's like you are.
Yeah, really.
No,
if you want to say,
I'm asking. My question is very specific. If you could tell me a prediction that natural selection generates, right? Now, if we did not observe that prediction, that would presumably falsify the theory, all things being equal, right?
Okay, so you're talking about, let's say that we're taking the organisms that currently exist and haven't seen any new mutations, and we're going to predict a new mutation that's going to be advantageous to that organism. And so we want to have something that would be falsifiable so that it goes against our prediction.
Right.
Now, really?
When we had the nylon-eating bacteria, for example, had not developed the ability to process nylon generations
Well, why couldn't you just say that natural selection selected for something else?
I'm sorry, what?
Why couldn't you then just say natural selection selected for something else rather than the nylon eating ability?
Okay. So you're saying that given because evolution is random in the respect that the mutations are random, and all of this is very subtle variation in the processes or the proportions, physiologically or chemically.
I'm not talking about randomness at all. I'm just saying that if there's a prediction generated by the theory of natural selection, by the hypothesis of natural selection, we should expect something to occur. And if we don't observe that, that would falsify the hypothesis. Now, I'm asking what that observation could be, because in any instance in which someone said, well, this would be predicted on natural selection, right? And the population comes to fixation, why couldn't I just say, well, no, that wasn't predicted by natural selection. This other trait that conferred a reproductive advantage.
I was giving you actually examples of things that had been predicted before they were observed and then were observed. But you're not looking for things that had been predicted and were observed. You're looking for things that violate the prediction?
I'm looking for a possible observation that would falsify the hypothesis. So like in every other field of science.
I'm sorry. Okay, then the problem therefore is that natural selection has been post-confirmed. It has already been confirmed to be, and you're now wanting data to refute what has already been confirmed.
Look, first of all, I'm not understanding how what you're saying, how natural selection generates any predictive expectations. I don't understand that. If you could explain how it generates a specific prediction, I would be interested in that. But my question is that any prediction that you generated, right? We didn't observe that, yet the population came to fixation, right?
Okay.
Now, if that were to occur, why couldn't I just say natural selection is still acting upon it? It seems like any possible observation I could give you is going to be an observation of natural selection, and therefore it's unfalsifiable.
I admit I can't find a way of disproving what has already been proven in the positive sense.
Yeah.
Much like I can't find a way of disproving any other in physics. I can't think of a way of now disproving relativity.
I can think of a way of disproving relativity. It would be trivially simple. So if I were to observe a massive body of objects, well, let's just take something that's non-controversial, like the speed of light, right? If I were to observe something moving faster than the speed of light, that would falsify general relativity, as I understand it. Okay. I might not understand it correctly, but the point is that if I were to,
but the thing is, we've done tests to verify that, and it never has occurred.
It's not relevant.
No, he always saying.
In fact, probably the biggest and most harshest. Well, 1 second. But the biggest and most harshest test on general relativity would be the black hole merger.
But that's not what he's arguing. Josh is not arguing that. Josh is just saying this would be a falsification criteria. He's not saying that it has been falsified, or it could be. But, I mean, theoretically it could, because all theories have to have a falsification criteria. He's right. The speed of light in general relativity
has been proven to.
I can't personally imagine a way of falsifying what has already been proved, what has already been confirmed in the positive sense. If Josh is it Josh? I hope I'm using the right word. If Josh wants to posit a way of disproving what has already been confirmed in the positive sense, I'm totally open to listening to that.
The question is, what was it proven by appeal to predictions that it made?
Yes.
Okay, so what's a prediction that it could have made, that it made in the past, that if it didn't come true would show that it was false?
I don't know of any failed predictions regarding natural selection.
That's not the question I asked you. I asked you, what's a prediction that it made in the past that if it had not come true would have shown it was false.
I don't
Okay,
know.
so it exactly is what I just said. You said it was, yes. So I did get it exactly right, and you said it was wrong. It was
no. You misunderstood what I said.
You're asking
so
for a failed prediction.
What
You're asking
I said
for
was,
something.
What prediction did it make?
Any prediction.
No, let him say it. Let him say it, and then I'll explain how he got it wrong.
What prediction did it make in the past that if that prediction had not come true, would have falsified the hypothesis?
Okay, I just want to make sure that I did get it absolutely right, despite the fact that you thought you corrected me.
The answer to that question.
There is. I will re-answer the same answer I correctly gave the first time.
No, you didn't answer the question. I asked you what the prediction was.
I'm
What's
answering
the
the question. The same way
guys, stop.
The same way I answered it before when you didn't understand it the first time.
Jack, enough.
If I could have the floor for a moment, this is we're an hour and 43 minutes in. If we could go ahead and open it up for final saved rounds, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Steve, and I want to make sure that Aron gives his plugs for his run for state senate, his website, his podcast, and whatever.
Yeah,
let everybody else plug their shit.
Let me just wrap this one little thing up real quick, because I've been through this argument with Josh and Jack before, way back when, over the last couple of years on Audio's channel. So we are familiar with these arguments. Joe knows this argument very well. We've all, most of us have heard this argument. But then, in a nutshell, one, they are correct from a philosophical standpoint. But we're talking about biology, and what's going to happen is, because Josh and Jack are looking from philosophy, they're trying to falsify a scientific premise, which is that's not how it works. You're never going to be able to do it that way, okay? And I agree that.
Have you noticed?
That's exactly. That's exactly how.
That's probably for another discussion.
I just addressed.
That might be for another discussion. Right now, let's open it up for any saved rounds that any Zachary, Realistic, Paul, anyone who hasn't, Ochinawa.
Well, Jim, I think they were all going to. I think we were all going to. But Jim, I think that, to get this out of the way, I think everybody was going to agree upon that. What I just said, Josh was. I know General was. They're conflating. Yeah. They're trying to use philosophy against science, and this is what they do. But
no, that's not.
It's not going to work too well.
It's not philosophy, Steve. It's the same principle. It's the same philosophical underpinnings that undergird every single other philosophical.
You guys are incorrigible.
It's not philosophy, but it's the philosophical underpinning.
Arguments that encourage philosophy.
Can I please say something?
Listen to me. Listen to me.
Can I please say something?
Go ahead, move on.
Please say something.
Go for it.
You guys are not. You guys don't use falsification to identify which is a good theory, which is a bad theory. You guys don't use inference to the best explanation. You guys don't try and posit predictions so that you could show that your hypothesis is testable.
That's how all science
This is what we're asking for. And you guys are going, oh, it's philosophy.
No, because you're looking at it from a philosophical point of view.
I am going to go down the list. If there's any saved rounds that anyone has, now's your time to just go ahead and blast it out there. Zachary first.
Can I just make a comment? Oh, can I make a comment?
No, not yet. Not yet. Let's go with Zachary. Anything you got left to say?
Can it be on any topic?
Yep.
Any topic
whatever you got left.
Yeah. Can it be on any topic?
Yes, sir.
Nuts.
All right. So Aron, one discussion that I was watching the YouTube thing last night. I was curious about your thoughts on Han Solo's argument about the Nakash of Genesis 3, the quote unquote talking snake, and that's in fact a member of the Divine Council. I didn't quite catch what your response was to that.
Okay, well, I only understand the English translations. Now, since that debate, I have had people tell me that, that they are more scripted or more practiced in Hebrew than ever I will be, and they were saying that his use of the word Nakash is incorrect, and that it actually doesn't mean shining one, as he said that it did. Now, I don't know, because I don't know Hebrew. All I know is within the context of the story, it clearly is not talking about a shining one. It is clearly talking about a snake. If those are the two interpretations, and one of them has somebody having to crawl around on their belly without any legs to eat dust for the rest of their life, they're obviously not the shining one. They're the snake.
Can we all agree that a serpent is a snake, by the way?
Godless / realistic.
Are we meant to debate this point, or is that just going to be left hanging?
It's going to be left hanging.
Yeah, we're going to leave that hanging.
Yeah.
We're going to totally leave that hanging. Realistic / godless.
I'll just say, go to my YouTube channel. I've got like 10 videos on that debunks it while using scholars.
I don't doubt that. Somebody gave me a video from you that was 2.5 hours long, and after listening to you for 2.5 hours and hearing nothing that could have possibly led to your assumption.
You actually listened to that?
No, I didn't listen to the 2.5 hour thing. I talked to you directly for 2.5 hours, and you couldn't justify your argument in person, so I don't think you're going to be able to do it remotely. But
of course I justify my argument in person.
No, of course you did not. Absolutely
godless
did not. It was an abject, absolute
I did.
failure.
Jim, take control of my hangout, Jim.
You were conceding. You were conceding a lot of my points.
I'm trying. Godless, you're next. Any closing remarks?
Yeah, I've watched a lot of Aron Ra videos, and I've even seen him speak in person. And Aron Ra, it's just surprising me because Aron Ra prides himself on searching for evidence and the truth and embracing reality. And he criticizes Christians for having an emotional attachment to creationism. And it just seems like this would be really interesting and stimulating, man. He's always going after young earth creationists that are easy targets, and evolution is his area of expertise. So I think that this would be interesting and stimulating to him. And he seems to just want to dodge, which I see other people do.
Can you give me something that I would want to dodge?
I disagree with that.
Well, you dodged the last question that was asked you is what observation?
What was the last question that you imagined that I dodged?
What observation would falsify it? And you could asserted that these observations proved it, but if they don't falsify it, then they're not evidence.
I asked, and other people who are not me and do not pride themselves on being me.
If those observations are not evidence against it, that they can be evidence for it.
What observations do you have?
Just yes or no. Just answer yes or no. Do you think if those observations cannot be evidence against it, that they can still be evidence for it?
Did you ever have?
Yes or no.
I can't answer the question.
Next up is Paul.
Understand what you're
Paul,
talking about.
do you have anything to add?
Excuse me. Do you actually have an observation that you think should disqualify that?
No, I think it's unfalsifiable.
Okay, next is Paul.
I did ask
Paul
for anything that could falsify it. I said that I am unaware of any means of falsifying what has already been confirmed. I asked you.
You're asserting that it's been proven when there's can't be that it's impossible for there to be evidence against it, but there's evidence.
I don't think we're going to come to.
I didn't say. I never said in any way that there was. Okay, excuse me. Please let me say. She's attacking me, and she can't hear me correcting her if you're getting in and talking at the same time.
That are evidence for it.
What observations do you imagine support your contention here?
I don't think that an observation is there can exist an observation.
So you're saying there is no observation I could consider as counter evidence against natural selection.
Can you tell me one?
Exactly.
I can think of one.
Okay.
Exactly. Then there can't be evidence for it. You didn't answer my question, Aaron.
If we presented evidence for it, hold on.
You are evading the question. It's a yes or no question. Can I please ask it one more time? Because you did not answer me. I said, do you believe that there can be evidence for it if there can't be evidence against it? If an observation it cannot be counted as evidence against it, do you think it can still be counted as evidence for it? Yes or no?
Let me see if I can.
Notice he doesn't say yes or no. Notice he doesn't answer the question.
Because you haven't answered a sensible question. You haven't asked a sensible question.
Next up, I'm going to go with Paul. Paul, do you have any safe
hold on. We want clarification here. I'm not going to have this conversation ending this way. She asked an absolute nonsense question. She asked a nonsense question. Now, we have examples of predictions that were made that would confirm natural selection. We've seen them happen.
It can confirm it.
I asked her, excuse me. Go ahead. Yell your contentions at me again, and then I'll correct them.
So yes or no, are you asserting that although the observation cannot disconfirm it, it can still confirm it? Yes or no?
Wrong.
That's not.
I did not.
Everybody who's watching, notice he didn't answer the question. He just said wrong.
You asked a question that can't be answered.
I can answer.
Although I can. Okay, you said although no evidence can confirm it, which is wrong because evidence can confirm it.
You're acting like a creationist.
hang on. No, he's
Yeah,
not.
I'm
He's
gonna
not. But let me
jump in.
try.
Would you mind if I give
Can
an
someone
example?
translate her?
Yes,
no,
I can translate.
into
I can
logic?
translate. Yeah,
Can
I can translate.
please,
Aaron,
can I give an example?
I understand
Because
what
it
both
seems
sides
like
are trying to say.
it seems
Oh,
like
go ahead.
a classic example of falsification would
Because she's
be to
asking a question.
identify. Would
She's
be
asking
to
a fallacious
identify. I'm
question.
sorry, I wasn't done talking.
Okay.
Identify like bunny bones in the pre-Cambrian fossil record. That would
That's not what she's talking about.
disconfirm. That's exactly
That's
what she's
falsifiable
talking about.
That's
evidence.
exactly not what she's talking
Okay,
about.
what she's talking
she's
about,
asking
if I can
what would be
clarify,
an observation.
if I can clarify, what she's
talking
saying.
about false.
Notice that you haven't
Okay,
answered my question.
stop. I'm taking over.
No
I'm
one
taking.
can
I'm
answer
taking
her
over.
question.
Stop, Godless.
Because her question
Godless.
requires a fallacy.
Godless,
I would
do
in
not
order
unmute.
to answer her question with a yes or no, I would have to accept her premise, which is fucking wrong. I can't accept.
Okay.
The question is,
we're done.
assuming that the question is that if no evidence can support, then can I admit evidence against? But you're wrong. The question is wrong. There is not that there's no evidence that supports. There is evidence that supports.
Yep.
So I can't take your fallacious question.
I'm about to
Paul,
eject.
do you have any safe rounds?
Godless, I'm about to
Somebody
eject.
in here,
Let me
get her to
explain.
phrase that question in a
Yes.
way that a reasonable person
Go
could
ahead, Paul.
answer it yes
I
or
can
no.
do it. Yes,
honestly.
I can do it.
Can there
What
be
did she
evidence
say?
for-
Okay.
Can there be
Okay, you guys are done. You
evidence
guys are
for-
done. You guys are done.
There
You guys
can't
are
be evidence
done.
Okay,
The
Paul.
rest of you put it together.
Okay, I'm
phrase
not-
that question.
You're out.
Where an honest person would address
Asking,
it
Okay.
I
honestly.
did.
Let me
And
answer it
rephrase.
accurate.
Okay, this
I
is what they're
did,
saying.
Steve.
But he's not understanding you, Joe. So
Go
let me
ahead,
give it a
Steve.
shot.
Hey,
Aaron,
Richard,
what
in
they're-
general, I have all new respect for you as moderators because this shit is damn difficult.
It takes a
dude.
lot of control, my friend. Okay, now you know what I
Okay.
go through every day.
This is damn difficult.
But let me explain.
Oh,
let me
God.
explain what
Okay,
Godless
Paul,
is trying to
please
say.
give me. Okay,
I'm going to let Steve go for a second.
All she is saying, in order to have, based on Bayes' theorem, in order to have evidence for something, you have to have the ability to have evidence against. Okay?
Okay.
And all she's trying to say is that if you say there's no way to have evidence against something, no way to falsify, that means you could have not evidence for something. This is one of the arguments that people have actually said. What?
We've already said we've got evidence for the thing, and I already said many times that I am not aware of any way that we would be able to falsify that. I can't think of a counter argument to disprove what has already been confirmed.
The question isn't can you falsify the evidence that's already been presented. The question is, can you identify a circumstance in which your theory can be falsified?
Right, a falsification
like I
criteria.
said, one of the examples would be to identify like bunny bones in the middle. Would be to identify bunny bones in the middle of the pre-Cambrian.
Which is irrelevant here because that's only talking.
Well,
how is that irrelevant?
That's actually relevant because a fully fossilized.
God damn it!
Sorry, go ahead.
That wouldn't disconfirm evolution. Is that what you're saying?
If I saw a fully formed bunny skeleton under the KT layer, that would give me pause. As
You're
an
talking
atheist,
within limits. Excuse me. The limits of her question are not the validation of the fossil record. She's talking specifically about the process of natural selection. So we have to identify whether natural selection is a factor. It has nothing to do with bunnies in the Cambrian, and bunnies in the Cambrian would not disprove.
I gave you an example of how you can show that there's evidence against your theory. So you would want to say evidence against natural selection would be evidence against natural selection. Excuse me, evidence against natural selection would be something like traits that don't confer higher reproductive success still being passed on.
Yep.
Which would not include bunnies in the Cambrian. That's a different topic.
Example. Do you know what an example is? Because
yes, I know what an example is. I also know what natural selection is, and I know that your example doesn't have dick to do with natural selection. You're talking about validating the fossil record. Bunnies in the Cambrian.
Are you really this confused?
Bunnies in the Cambrian would falsify the natural the Cambrian, or excuse me, the fossil record, but would not falsify the natural selective process.
I was giving you an example of what they were asking
something
for.
that hasn't got dick to do with the natural selective process.
You were having trouble with the idea that you could have evidence against a theory. So I gave you an example of how you could show what would be evidence against a theory.
Why does that even matter?
I didn't say.
Okay, listen, guys.
It's not that difficult. This
Aron
is
just
like
stepped away. Oshinawa, do you have any safe rounds for everybody?
Oh, well, I did have an argument for the existence of God, but I don't know if we have time to get into that.
I don't think so.
Boy, something a little more light.
All right, well,
Say-
sure. Well, I think that Aron Ra did. I think that he often uses magic to define that God acting in the world. I think that's kind of disingenuous because magic has historically meant man manipulating supernatural forces, and Christians have also historically been against magic. So I think that
but the distinction in this case is that the difference between magic and miracle is only who does it. If a god performs magic, then we call it making a miracle. Just like, if you murder somebody and that person happens to be a VIP, then it becomes an assassination. But that's the only difference. So the question that I asked, the woman presented a question to me that could not be answered with a yes or no, but because it required a requirement that I can't admit. So if the rest of you could form that as a yes or no question that I could actually honestly answer yes or no without accepting some fallacy at the same time, then I'd be happy to do that.
Yep.
But I've already stated that I am unaware of any way to falsify natural selection having already been confirmed. There's not an experiment I can think of that would imply that natural selection doesn't work. And I explained the details about this.
Yeah, and you're right. And you're
That
right.
in any number of lineages, but we understand that the way that these mutations run is random. So we could roll a dice for how these proportions may change. And with whatever lineage we're talking about, we can think about, or we can predict what advantages there would be if we would just improve this one feature by some degree. But it may not be that way. And if the roll of the dice goes a different direction, then that feature might be indicative of a different direction entirely. So I admit I don't know a way of falsifying what has already been confirmed, but I can express what predictions have been made and confirmed. So I can't accept the dichotomy that even though I can't personally think of a way of falsifying natural selection because of the inherent properties of natural selection, I can't think of a way of saying, well, that mutation didn't occur in this many trials, then that means it can't work. But we can make predictions that if it does work at all, then we would get this result, and that's what we've seen.
Mr. Final rounds.
Yeah, okay. So for the final round, I would like to ask...
Are they even here? Those people that are bellowing at me?
Just got kicked out.
They got kicked out.
I kicked them out.
All right.
Everything I just said is pointless.
No, they hear it. No, they're listening.
They're going to hear it.
Well, I can respond.
They're listening
to
in live feed. They're listening.
Mister's talking.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mister.
I'll change the subject a bit. So I have a way how propositions are weighed against their opposites and how we would work that out. So if I can quickly run through that and see if you guys agree, and then from that make a point. Okay, so based on the logical law of excluded middle, we have a proposition and its opposite. So I'll write this in the chat so you can follow. So it's X and not X, okay? So between a proposition and its opposite, you have to be 50-50 because at the moment we have no content to those propositions. I'm using logical symbolism. And until there's content, all you would do to assume one proposition more likely true than its opposite, all you do is have just blind assumption. And let's consider blind assumption a bad mechanism. So other than blind assumption, you would have to be 50-50. So let's put some content to those propositions. Let me see if I can get some here. So here's a few. I'll copy and paste. So if you check in the chat, here's some content. So the stars in the universe are even in number, and the opposite of that proposition would be the stars in the universe are uneven in number. The proposition the universe is symmetrical in shape, and the opposite would be the universe is asymmetrical in shape. Okay, and I've got one for God. Ultimate reality is personal, i.e. God exists. Ultimate reality is impersonal, i.e. God does not exist. X, there is a car on Jupiter. There is no car on Jupiter. Now, there's three ways you can prove a proposition or give evidence or reason for a proposition over its opposite. So let's have a look at that and see if you agree with me, if you think there's more. So the first way would be to give direct reason for a proposition over its opposite, either some reason direct in experience or an inference from that experience, okay? The second way would be, which is used wrongly, the absence of evidence is evidence of absence. Now, this is true in some cases. So let me show you where it's not true and why it's true in some cases. So let's look at the proposition here: the stars in the universe are even in number, and the stars in the universe are uneven in number. Now, no absence of evidence for this being is evidence for the stars.
You're breaking up.
Oh, sorry. Am I back? Am I back?
You're good.
Okay. So no absence of evidence for the stars being even in number, the stars being uneven in number. Okay. Where it does apply, let's look at this. Let me have a look here. Sorry, I've lost my way.
You just posted this on the chat, right? About the universe is symmetrical in shape.
Yeah.
Universe is asymmetrical in shape.
Yeah, yeah.
There is no car on Jupiter. There is a car on Jupiter.
Yeah. Okay. So the absence of evidence is only evidence of absence if we should expect to see evidence that we don't have. So let me give a proposition here. I'm going to post two new ones. So as you can see, the stars in the universe being even in number and uneven, an absence of evidence for X there that they're even is no evidence for them being uneven. The only time it's evidence is if we should expect it. So let's look at this new scenario. Okay, in the new scenario, there is no planet the size of Texas between the Earth and the Moon, and there is a planet the size of Texas between Earth and the Moon. Now, the absence of evidence, the evidence of absence, because if there was a planet between the Moon and the Earth the size of Texas, we should expect certain evidence that if we don't have, would count as evidence against it. So we should expect different tidal formation. We should expect people to see it. We should expect NASA to know about it. And that absence of evidence would act as evidence of absence. So the first way, let me just recount. The first way to prove it is to give direct reason. The second way is an absence of evidence only in the case that we would expect to see evidence for one of the positions that we don't see. Okay. Now, the third way to prove a proposition over its opposite is just by background information and chance happenstance. So let me give an example here. So I've got two propositions here. There is no teapot on the backside of Mars. There is a teapot on the backside of Mars. Now notice, side of Mars, we have no actual evidence for there being a teapot, and but the fact is, no absence of evidence proves that there's no teapot on the back of Mars. Now, why do we all believe it's less likely there's a teapot on the back of Mars? Based on background information of how teapots are formed and how things move in space, and then
we get it. Go ahead and fast forward a little.
Okay. So all these. So you've got the three ways: direct evidence for a proposition, the absence of evidence for a competing proposition acts as evidence, and the other one is if you have a load of background information, not a specific, but in a general case, you can say, okay. So now let's look at the issue of God. So we've got two propositions here: ultimate, and I'm making this very simple, but ultimate reality is personal. That means it's metaphysics. It is like conscious, aware, directed, and the other opposite is that ultimate reality is impersonal, that it's unaware, that it's not purposeful, it's meaningless in its forces and processes. Now, what reasons have we got as atheists? I'm not an atheist, but if we were an atheist, to think that ultimate reality is more likely impersonal than personal, that you think these arguments will hold up rather than being able to be dismantled and bring you back to agnosticism between the two propositions?
Oh man, I don't. Aron,
Hey,
I don't know, man, because it just seems natural to assume that the negative is going to be the one that you discard first.
Yeah, but the thing is, the negative would only. If you would say, okay, let's make the argument that all propositions that lie in the negative have this trait that they're more likely to be untrue than the ones that lie in the trait of positive. I can't see that. So let's say I give you two propositions here. My t-shirt, like my trousers, have a phone in them right now. The pocket of my trousers is a phone, and the negative is the pocket of my trousers does not have a phone. The negative does not seem to have any reason why it should be more likely true. Like, let's say I've got two propositions. The car on my drive has petrol.
If you held a gun to my head and someone asked me, is there a phone in Mr's pocket right now, I would say no. Just as a default negative, as a default
Well, you can't do that,
gender
though, Jim.
neutral.
You can't. That's not neutral. That's not a new position. You're actually making a claim at that point. You have no expectation either way of the hypothesis.
Gun to my head. Yeah, gun to my head, though, I would have to go with the neutral position.
But why?
If Christianity has achieved nothing else, they have at least succeeded in diminishing any possible interest I could ever have in philosophy.
Yeah, and I agree. But I think, Mr. I think the problem is we do have prior.
That's really interesting, Mister. I'm going to move on. That is really cool. Steve, I'm going to move to you.
Hopefully my mic will work here because I've been trying to talk, Mister. I think the problem is we have prior expectations of values, right? We have prior things we haven't observed in order to lend us an ability to give a rational decision on certain things, even though it's only a 50% hypothesis, right? Your phone in your pocket. I cannot make an informed decision because I have no knowledge either way. There's no expectation of your phone in your pocket. I cannot answer that. I think Jim's wrong. You cannot have a default position on that. Okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, that's why I'm the agnostic in the room, right? But I agree with you on that. but when it comes to things like, by the way, let me while I've got the mic, and I haven't had it very long. I do want to apologize to Aron. Well, I was uncalled for the way you were treated, and there was no reason for them to yell at you. The argument is not necessarily fundamentally wrong, okay? And I want you to understand that we'll try to suss it out later. They're just approaching it horrifically. They explain it to you very poorly, in my opinion. And when you reach a point where you're just yelling at somebody because they're not understanding the objection, you've already lost the argument. And in my case, they've lost the argument.
My problem was that the way that they phrased the question, they don't understand. I can't. It's like asking, "Have you quit beating your wife?"
Yeah, it was poorly worded in a lot of ways.
That question?
Can you guys tell me what you think their question was?
Well, I already.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Since there is no evidence that could support natural selection, then then are you unable to think of any evidence that could that could refute falsify natural selection? Obviously, I can't answer that question either with a yes or a no. It's bullshit either way.
Well, they're not saying there is no evidence. They're asking you if it's a theory. Are you able to identify? Excuse me. Are you able to identify?
The question she asked demanded that I assume that no evidence could support natural selection.
No, look.
And the way that
can you identify evidence that would go against the theory? Yes or no?
Yes, I can.
If she had only said that, I would have answered the question.
Exactly. Thank you. I agree with you.
Totally do that. That would have been.
That's what I think she should have been trying to say it. Word it that way, Joe.
Yes,
that would have been great.
Yes.
Yeah, but that is not what she said.
Nope.
That's what that's why I had a problem with what
Joe,
they were saying too.
Joe, you're next. Yeah. Any final save rounds?
Well, I mean, what can you identify?
Anything.
What would just confirm natural selection?
No, anything you
have repeated so many times this evening already. I cannot.
Anything that Aron has not repeated already.
Yeah, as I've already said.
What's the rest on that stuff?
No, anything.
Okay.
Do you have any final save rounds?
2 dogs having a cat. Move on. There.
Okay. Heretic.
A dog to a non-dog. There you go. G-Man wins. G-Man wins.
Hey, if we came from monkeys, why are we not monkeys anymore?
Why are there still monkeys?
Why is there one in the Oval Office? That's what I want to know.
Heretic had to get that dig in.
Go for it.
Yeah, well, I have to make fun of you guys because we have a real prime minister, but you know. But what Steve was saying about the phone in the jacket, I'd be looking for a bulge, man. Like,
wow, not gonna touch that one.
Okay, Aron, saved rounds. Anything final? And this includes plugs.
All right. Well, if anybody cares, I am running for Texas State Senate in District 2. If anyone wants to support that, we are going to be doing a campaign fundraiser telethon later in this week, and that you can make donations to aronra.org, not aronra.com, but aronra.org. That's ARONRA.org. You mentioned earlier about promoting my book. My book seems to be doing very well, but if Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism is available on Amazon.com, and currently I think has, well, it's not entirely 5 stars, but it's very close to that. So I mean, as most things are, it's gotten like 1 or 2 negative reviews from Christians, but otherwise it's doing very, very well. And I don't know what else to promote at the moment.
If it is lost on me that Now, if you do not buy the book, if you just go to his video series, you're going to lose a lot. So it behooves you to go ahead and buy that book, because there's a lot of information on there that's not in his video series, his 17-part phylogenetics video series. And that is it for me. I give it back to Steve.
Hey, everybody, I want to thank everybody for coming out and watching this. I know there's a fight going on. Those of us who are too cheap to go spend $100 for it, we can figure out what happened later on. Because I wasn't going to do it, but what fight? What fight? I love that. Great. All right, you didn't know. You didn't know what the fight tonight?
Fight? No.
Mayweather fight tonight. McGregor.
No.
I actually saw a bit of news about that. I never heard of Conor McGregor until this evening.
Who won that?
Nobody knows. Nobody knows. We don't care. Don't say anything. Yeah, you know. No spoilers. Come on.
And now,
come on. What is this?
Being a competitive fighter, I know probably who won, but if it were in the octagon, it would have gone the other way.
Well, we want to see G-Man and Trumpism. That's gonna be the next heavyweight fight. That'd be cool. So, anyways, guys, we're gonna be ending this, but I hope Aron and Jim, can you stick around for a little after we go off air?
I do. I just want, before we go off the air, I want to say that I'm deeply disturbed by the woman that is asking me that question, and I understand she does not, and she doesn't understand why I could not answer that question with a yes or no, and the reason that I could not
was a bad question.
Was because of the way she phrased the question.
Yeah,
it was a bad question. I'm sorry that she doesn't understand that.
If she wasn't yelling so bad, we could have sussed it out. But once you start raising your voice like that, that's not how this room operates. She knows that. I know Gallus a long time. I mean, we're friends, but she knows my rules. And I warned her when she first came in here, or when she first asked me, don't go off in your little troll shit. And she decided to anyways. That's why I had to reject her. So if she was warned ahead of time, because I knew this was what's going to be happening. This is what they were trying to do, Aron. And these are all atheists, by the way. But they're
not.
Oh, they are atheists. Oh, she is an athist. Trust me.
No, they're not.
No, they're not. Well, she is, but he is not.
Yeah, he said he's.
I don't believe a word he says. Yeah, I don't. I've known Josh for several years. I don't believe him on that. He could say it maybe, but I don't buy into that. I think he's just screwing with people because he's known to troll. So I don't.
Aron, thanks so much for coming on. It's been a great pleasure.
Yeah, this has been great, guys. Jim, I look forward to you also joining us again on the Great Debate Community channel multiple times. You're like going to be a mainstay.
Fuck yeah, baby.
So, yeah. So if you haven't gone to Jim's channel, check it out. Atheist Edge. He's also on Facebook. You can find him many places. Go check out Aron's stuff. And Aron, of course, as
always.
The
Raw Man Podcast. He never plugged the Raw Man Podcast.
That's the podcast. Go ahead.
The problem with the Raw Man Podcast, apparently, in order to get it uploaded on iTunes, or some fee that you have to pay to iTunes, and I haven't done in a long time.
Oh, really?
I didn't pay anything for mine.
Pay anything. But
in order to have iTunes promote the Raw Man Podcast, I have to pay iTunes to do that.
But iTunes and Stitcher, if your video is over an hour long, it will not go on there. So you got to keep it under an hour.
Keep it under an hour. Well, that'll be easy this next time. I am going to be interviewing. I'm trying to interview a couple of the guys that are running for governor in Texas because they're both very interesting. There's a guy named Thor Harris who looks like me with a better beard. He's a more biker Viking than I am, and he's running for governor of Texas, and I think that's wonderful. He's a drummer for a rock band in Austin. And then there's another guy here in Dallas that I can't wait to talk to, but he hasn't answered my emails. And he's running for governor of Texas too. I can't remember his name right now, but he was recently crowned Mr. Leather because he runs a leather gay bar here in Dallas.
Nice.
That is awesome.
Hey,
is he in our area?
But neither of them will talk to me because I'm an atheist.
Huh?
What?
That's crazy.
Really?
But I am going to be interviewing. I will be interviewing on Monday. I will be interviewing no less a person than Wendy Davis herself.
Whoa, shit! Whoa. I will have a Buddhist on tomorrow. It'll probably be aired Tuesday. It's going to be a Buddhist, and then I'm going to have a couple. They've been married 40 years. The husband is a devout, militant atheist, and the wife is a evangelical. And
how the hell does that work?
Yes,
that's
what the show's going to be about, baby.
Like makeup sex.
Yeah,
for 40
exactly.
Years.
40 years of makeup sex.
Can you imagine what? I mean, they're either neither of them interested in their religious beliefs at all, or the sex has got to be fantastic.
Exactly. It's got to be amazing. Wow.
Hey guys, I was gone for an hour. Did Aron concede all of his arguments?
Richard, we're talking about sex. So we're talking about sex. It doesn't involve you, Richard.
He conceded all victory to you, Richard.
Real quick, I also want to apologize to Paul Agia, who came in, but he didn't get a chance. Sorry, Paul. I know you and Aron are good friends, as well you should be, because Paul, I love your channel, Paul. You know, he's awesome. But Paul would have said hi to you, Aron, but he didn't get a chance to, so I wanted to apologize.
I feel bad about that.
Yeah.
Because
So
I saw him, but yeah, I couldn't address him.
Yeah, he had to take off. So, but you know, he's in here every other day. But I got Hogtie. Hogtie, do you want to say hi to Aron real quick? Because before I go off the air, do you have anything to add or care?
Hogtie, that name sounds familiar.
I do. He can't beat my argument. If the Bible came from bullshit, then why is there still bullshit?
Yeah, there you go. There you go. And with that, guys, I'm taking it off the air, and we will see you later.
we were.
On. You want something? Right. You want more, Hogtie? I'll keep it on for you,
I thought we were off air.
No.
I wouldn't have said that on air. That's not very polite.
Since when are you
on air? I'll be damned.
No, sorry. That was on air. But you want me to go off now? All right, I'm going off, guys.
Yes, sir.
All right, we're going to take this off here, guys. Thank you for watching. We loved all the 150 people watching, and we'll see you later. Peace. Thank you for Jim for your awesome moderating. Well, the best you could do.
Yes, sir.
Peace. And